So in the previous videos, we talked about the hierarchy and the architecture of Omnisphere. It's been a couple of years actually since I did those videos. So this one's a tiny bit more updated, or rather Omnisphere is a bit more updated now. You'll see that we have, instead of 2 layers in each part, we now have 4, A, B, C, and D. But we still have the same number of parts, 8 parts inside of one multi. So what I'm going to do in this video is give you, now that you've got a bit of an understanding of the architecture of it, a bit of an overview, real simple overview of the interface, so that we can dive into stuff after that. So first of all, let's start out with browsing in Omnisphere. The thing that often confuses people straight off is that we have 3 different browsers, or actually 4 if you're counting this sidebar, but I kind of see this as a kind of just a handy reference browser on the left. If we ignore this for a second and just look at the middle, we actually used to not have this side browser here. This was something that was added in version 2. What we have is 3 windows. We have the sound source browser, which is on a layer. So this is the sound source browser. We can be synth or sample on layer A, sound source browser on layer B, same on C, same on D, right? That is all on part 1, right? And that's where, and part 1 is also called a patch. This is why it gets a bit confusing here, because we've got lots of names going on. So we've got the sound source browser inside of a part, and a part is called a patch. And you can click in the patch here and choose different patches. So that will load up everything into part 1. And then you have the multi-browser, which is up at the top. So if you choose, say, let's choose something here. I don't know what this is going to sound like. It usually takes a while to load, because if you see my spinning wheel of death at the moment, it's because my computer's having to think a lot, because we're loading up an entire multi which has all these different parts going on. So if I play this, you can see that what we've got is part 1, 2, and then a bit of 3 going on as well. So quite subtle but kind of complex sound design, and whoever designed this multi inside of Omnisphere decided to use parts, and I can see that we're using stack mode as well, so there might be some stuff that I'm not playing just on those 2 notes, and we'll find out what that means later on. So that is the smallest level, which is your sound source browser. Then you've got the patch browser, which controls 1 part, or 2, it controls part 1 and part 2, part 3, or part 4, etc., etc. And then you've got the biggest browser of them all, which is the multi. Okay, cool. Right. The first window we're going to look at then is this, or part of the interface, is this top header here. Because what I need to do is actually clear this whole thing and start from scratch. And Omnisphere calls that initializing. So if I click on this here, we can scroll down and say initialize multi. We can also initialize patch, or we can initialize layer. So if I click initialize layer, that's just going to clear layer D on part 1 inside of this multi. But I don't want to do that. I want to initialize everything. So I'm going to go all the way up to initialize multi. And that's going to clear everything. And we're going to be back to a kind of simple beginning point. So the header. On the top left here, we have this button, which basically reduces the interface. This is actually the size of Omnisphere before we had version 2, but then they introduced this browser and some other features. So I'm going to keep that open, but you don't need to think about it for the moment. Then you see this utility thing, utility menu, not thing, that I showed you a minute ago to initialize stuff. There's a lot of things in here which we won't go over in this video, but that's kind of a bit like your settings menu or your kind of fundamental actions menu. So then we have this little button here, HW, which means hardware, and that's a recent update for 2.5. Recent for when I'm recording this video anyway. And you can see that we can basically connect Omnisphere to a number of different hardware profiles. So if you own any of these, you can hook Omnisphere up and control it directly from that hardware synth. And they've done a really good job on this. You can find that on the Spectrasonics website, where they did a kind of keynote thing or a talk where Eric Persig is talking through all the different hardware profiles that they launched with and how you can use Omnisphere. It's quite cool. So then we have our part browsers here. So 1 to 8, we have different parts, and every time I click one of these, this changes this. Although it doesn't look like it, we're looking at a completely different window here. The whole of this window changes to part 5, 6, 7, etc., etc. As I said, we've got our multi-browser here. I won't go over that again. And this window here, when we click on multi, the whole of this changes. And what we have is access to kind of 4 controls, or 4 fundamental things to do with controlling multi-instruments. Now, if you're not using Omnisphere as a multi-instrument, so you're just using the patch, or one patch with its different layers, you never really need to look at this too much. You might want to, I guess, obviously you want to look at FX, but you don't necessarily need to look at the general multi-view, because what we have is a mixer which controls the different parts, and then we have stack mode where we can control where on the piano those different parts are. We have a live mode where you can control the different parts from your iPad or tablet. And then of course you have your effects as well. So I'm skimming over these loads because we're going to go over them in another video, but I wanted to give you kind of a conceptual overview about how this all works. I'm definitely going to skip over this one here, system, because there's a load of stuff inside of it that are really sort of about customizing your experience and also memory management and things like that. Then we have a very simple overall volume slider. Now I tend to actually work with Omnisphere, not necessarily with limiters in my DAW or compressors so much. I tend to just open it up and pull it down by default to about -5 dB, because it's pretty hot, this instrument. There's a lot of patches which are, you know, pretty impressive, because quite rightly the sound designers want to kind of catch your attention and get you inspired by some sounds, but sometimes that sacrifices kind of headroom. So I tend to pull this down because you get a lot of clipping, especially with the multi-parts. It's really hard to control some of the sounds, even though they're amazing. So that's the header. After the header then, you obviously have this central area, which is pretty huge. We've mentioned that we have the different layers here inside of each part. And then obviously when you're on each layer, you have all of the editing controls for that layer. On the main page, we can control the different layers kind of on a simple level. So here on this main page is really a kind of simple way of controlling layers A, B, C, and D. And then you have the FX view for that layer, and then you have something called the arpeggiator and the orb as well. But we'll go over these in greater detail in separate videos. So that's the main kind of edit page to think about on your patch or your part. And then of course on the left, what you have is a really, really simple or rather compact view of your browsing. So either the multi or the patch browser. I don't think anyway, at least I've never found a way to do it, control the sound source browsing from this side view here. I think it's just patches and multis. So, and of course, if you click on it, either the title there or the zoom button, you can go deeper into this kind of directory here, which we'll do another video on later on, and how you kind of work with library management. So you'll see a kind of, it's basically the same idea, but in a compact view. So 3 fundamental areas. You've got your header, your main edit page, as well as some other kind of subcategories within that area, and then your kind of simple browsing view on the left.